So we're back here today, episode 4 of Progressives for Trump, although we haven't actually formally named it that. And today, we are recording from Asheville, North Carolina, and to those of you who may not be aware, this region had a horrible hurricane last week. It's been, I think, 8 or 9 days since the storm started, and there's just like massive devastation everywhere in Asheville and in the surrounding towns in western North Carolina. And yeah, I think people have referred to it as a storm of biblical proportions. Like, it was just pretty intense. And it felt timely to do a deep dive on climate change, like policies of Trump as they pertain to climate change. And it feels really edgy to get into this subject because honestly, I am not very well versed. Like, I haven't dug deep enough into the policies to be able to authoritatively say something about it. So it's going to be a practice for me in revealing what I know and revealing what I don't know. And I really welcome informative comments, like of a kind nature. But I still have something to share on just unpacking how to think about this policy. Like, that's what I want to present more, like how I orient to climate change and policies around climate change, and what I've seen in my direct experience. What my sense is of what could work, what wouldn't work. And we'll see how the conversation goes from there.
Yeah.
Do you have an opening statement, Luca?
I mean, I guess it's a sad time for us here, and I'm still without power. A lot of our past week has been taken up, like volunteering, helping people out. I was in like toxic mud the other day. There's like unknown contaminants in the mud that flooded some of the buildings. So yeah, it sucks. And then I guess what feels really important to say from the get-go is, like, climate change sucks, and or at least speaking for myself, but I'm assuming you, like, we understand that it's a real major threat. And it feels like, and I personally am not in agreement with Trump on his climate change policies.
Interesting.
For the most part, there's some areas. I'm also not in agreement with the Democrats on their climate policies, but it is important to say, like, relating to our previous conversations about Trump being the opportunistic choice. Even while I was reading the articles about it, there was this feeling of like, oh, since I'm like supporting Trump, I must be on board with all of his things. But that would be like inauthentic. And it's more like, here are the two choices, and there's certain things in the Trump choice that feel really important. And for me, those, given the choice and given that he's there for 4 years, like, outweigh the climate change side of things. And then, as we'll get into, there's some things on climate change that, like, I feel like he's doing well, but for very few, and some where I'm like, what are you doing, bro? Like, but the flip side of that is then also, like, the Democrat side also, I have that same feeling, like, what are you guys doing? Like, no. So I think it's all around, like, it's a pretty sad issue to talk about, because I mean, it's happening, and like, the solutions are not working, and
I felt really alive in that moment where you said climate change is real, like that statement. Alive in the sense of, like, wow, like, what an opportunity to unpack that. Because in my perspective, it's gotten, like, the conversation has gotten so contracted, and it's like, do you believe science is real? Like, it kind of gets into that zone sometimes. And science, the relationship of science with truth is ever evolving. So even this question of whether
Right. Yeah. Mm.
Science is, I'll talk specifically about whether science is real or not, is ridiculous to me. It's like, specifically what are you, like, what it evokes in me is like, what are you even talking about? Like, at any given point in any science, in any attempt to explore and understand truth, there is established theories and then open hypotheses. And that phrasing of, is science real or is climate change real, feels very contractive to me. And
I'm curious what you would see as the alternative
Yeah.
frame on that. Yeah.
I suppose there is a desire in me to go beyond that line of questioning, like, is climate change real or not, and dig into more specifics and like this disastrous hurricane that happened here has been listed as, like, I think it's like a once in 1,000 years phenomena, which is pretty shocking. Like, it's, and I haven't looked into it, but I'm imagining there are other such events happening across the world which get bundled under climate change. Yeah, I'm noticing I'm perhaps not very educated on this subject. Like, that is like the first fear that is coming up of even like speaking to it. Like, or maybe I don't know enough, and it is true that I don't know enough. There's so much information. Like, there is this sense of like information overwhelm, and also a fear of like anything that I say, there'll be like an attack.
Right.
So then it's almost like I have no space to I feel afraid that I have no space to express till I locate all the information and digest all of it. And even the attack will be of the form of that contracted climate change denier or something like that is the fear. Like, the frame I hold about this is that, as oriented as I am towards capitalism, which I see as a journey of helping a system that helps every individual connect to the interest of their self, and from that place tap into their creativity, and from that place bring forth their unique creative offering for society at large. Like, that is how I see capitalism. And because there is an orientation of self-interest, like kind of rooting in one's own individuality, it can almost seem like there is no communal orientation inherently. Like, like, what about the community? Like, everyone is individualistic. And in the stage of capitalism we are in, it has led to lots of problems that can be classified broadly under the tragedy of the commons. It's like common spaces, like everyone is in their self-interest, but they haven't fully individuated, like actualized. So their self-interest is very shallow. Like, they're doing things, like we were joking about earlier about how, like, tech employees, like bringing home like fat paychecks, selling their souls 40 hours per week, not really enjoying it. And then from a resentful place, like buying shit. They may not even realize that it's from a resentful place, but like, there is that energy of like escape from, like I spent a week doing things that mean nothing to me, like bring no soul enrichment. And now I'm going to make up for it by buying shit on Amazon, or like, going to a Michelin star rated restaurant. So there is a self-interest activation in the masses that is not fully actualized. It's not like, it is not their unique offering. Like me, when I was working at Meta or some other startup before that, like that is not my unique individuality shining forth and bringing my creation. It's like it's a sliver of that, but it's not the fullest extent of it. So we have the tragedy of the commons, because then the commons get neglected. But in the vision I have for capitalism, like the long term, I don't know why that. Maybe you should. Okay, let's start with the vision. In the vision I have for capitalism, like the long term vision, where everyone is, drops in enough into their self-interest to like really actualize their own unique creative force from an open-hearted place. There is, I think, once your heart is open enough, you see that yourself is not different from anyone else. Like you start sensing that oneness, that connection, and you still maintain your individual uniqueness and bring forth your creativity from there, but it is not disconnected from those around you. And in my direct experience, it's not even disconnected from the space I'm in. So it's like, it's important for me to like maintain the sanctity of my home, the sanctity of my neighborhood, the sanctity of my town, the sanctity of my world, in order to continue tapping into my creativity and bringing forth my unique gifts. I don't think I've reached that place yet where it's important for me to maintain like I don't feel that in my body, but I feel it about my home. I feel it about my neighborhood to some extent. But in that long-term vision, I imagine everyone will be like tapped in deeply, so that the world is taken care of. Until then, we need some kind of regulations that close the loop, because it's like, if I'm not taking care of the roads, you're not taking care of the roads, then the system needs to have some guardrails as to what we can do on the road and what we can't do on the road, to account for our lack of attunement to how that will impact us if we don't take care of it. So that is the view I hold, that yes, regulation is essential in climate change, and no, climate change cannot be solved by regulation. Climate change, the solutions will still come from individual entrepreneurs who are creative enough to come up with something new because they are interested in their own self's journey, and the regulations are guardrails till then. So that's the frame I hold, and where I get the contraction with climate change is real, climate change is not real, or like that languaging, is that it often comes from the left, like that accusation, climate change denier, and assertion, climate change is real. But it seems to be, in my view, it seems to assume that the state is going to come up with solutions better. Like regenerative farming was not invented by any government, it's like individual farmers were entrepreneurial enough to come up with that. Like Tesla was not invented by the US government. Like Elon Musk's entrepreneurship brought the electrical vehicle revolution. So it seems like that, I think that is like my main, I feel a lot of contraction around that phrase, like climate change is real or not. Because like, yes, there are disasters happening. Yes, we are not taking care of our commons, the planet, even like the neighborhoods that we live in. Let's just talk about what we can do to take better care of that. Then, so I suppose that in a sense, I do believe climate change is real, in the sense that there are these disasters, in the sense that we are not taking care of our planet the way we should be taking care of the planet. But that's like the level that I relate to it most.
Yeah. First of all, you gave a beautiful vision of like democracy, which is like the citizen being tapped into their own.
Democracy?
No, democracy, but
Really?
capitalism and democracy, I think, are fairly intertwined.
Yeah.
And which is that's a whole other topic of conversation. But I think they're not mutually independent in the sense that like if you have a state-run economy or a state-run country, then democracy, like, it's the democracy is not just like people choosing their representatives. It's also what you're talking about, like citizens, like the importance of the citizen being like engaged personally. And I feel like we've been seeing that in Asheville like so much. Like so many of the rescue efforts are literally just citizens coming together, and like crazy organizational networks are emerging. And
like the Cajun Navy.
Yeah, the Cajun Navy, but even locally, because they came from New Orleans, but even locally, there's like a whole volunteer networks just emerged from the ground up, and that are like coordinating gear coming in and have like, you know, sending out volunteers. Like they're cleaning the whole Marshall downtown, which is a town here that got totally flooded. Like all the mud there is being scooped out by like just citizens basically, and everyone pooling their tractors together and their materials and coordinating friends from out of town to like bring the right materials. And so that feels like it's not just about like we're all just passively sitting here and then we vote for the government and the government takes care of everything. Like I think that's intrinsically opposed to democracy, in the sense that the most important core of democracy is like everyone is jointly engaged in governance at all levels, which includes what we're doing right now, which is like talking about like the top leadership, and also includes what we're doing when we're not sitting here, which is volunteering here and like engaging with the local networks, because we have this care, like you're talking about, the sanctity of our home, our community, you know, our neighborhoods, our towns, and like it's not democracy if you're just voting for your leaders and that's your only participation as a citizen.
Right.
So that was one thing I wanted to say. And then, there's everything else you said, like, resonate with that. And a thing that's been living in me is like the embodied versus disembodied way of relating to climate change.
Say more.
Like, so we had this disaster, and it's very like, it's just so real. Like, it's just right in front of you, you know, and it's like, and whether it was caused by climate change or not, you know, I've totally no idea, honestly, but it could have been, because it was like a unique disaster. But whether it was or not, it is like maybe a forebearer of like things that might happen more frequently with climate change. So it does feel for me like related to that, but it's so real, and we're like relating to it. And then when I like go back to like climate change, it's like this abstraction that feels almost like meaningless compared to the lived embodied experience I'm having. And then even reading articles, I'm like, this feels like a mental palace or something almost, and like how people are relating to climate change, and the ways people are talking about solving it almost feels like self-soothing. And this is a big thing, like, you know, all these pompous like international summits, you know, and everyone, and then Greta Thunberg is like screaming, and you know, like, and then there's like all these like the Green New Deal, like we're gonna have 100% renewable emissions by 2030, arbitrarily, and the energy of it all has this like self-soothing energy of like everyone does feel on some level like this like crisis of climate change. Not everyone, but like a lot of people, and I feel it too. And then there's like, fuck, I gotta like do something about this. And then a lot of existing climate policy to me feels like self-soothing, like, oh, like this, okay, it feels like we're doing something, like, okay, we got all these summits happening, and we got, oh my god, all these politicians and policies that are like net zero, you know, net zero policies, like, okay, like we're doing things, but are we? I mean, that's the question. And then like from this embodied place, and when I relate to these policies, I'm like, oh, like it feels so like big, like beyond just like, we gotta like, oh, here's some tax credits for renewables, which is like the main policy intervention of the Green New Deal. Or like I read another one the other day, which was like public housing, like redoing public housing to be like zero emissions, which just feels like so missing the point. And it feels like it feels like self-soothing to me. And then when you're like being out here relating to it, it's like, this is such a vast issue, and this is like fundamental in the sense that it's about our like core relationship to nature. And trying to solve it within the like managerial frame of our current system feels like almost denying the profundity of the issue. So in a weird way, I feel like the people, like the Extinction Rebellion people who are like doing like really crazy protest things, like in some weird way, I feel like aligned with them, in the sense that at least they're tapped into like holy shit, like this is a fundamental thing. And the climate change it's almost like the symptom of a deeper issue that also ties into like a lot of our like lack of meaning and our lack of connection, the kind of the meta crisis and the deep existential despair that underlies a lot of like the surface layer. And this hurricane actually was really helpful for me, and I think many people, like just breaking out of that. Not that I was in it that strong, but there's the world around me was like in it, you know. And then with this, it's just like you just see destruction, and you like it just kind of it pauses that like wheel. You know, all the billboards are like without electricity, and there's like you know, the gas stations are out, and some of them have like fallen over, like the signs and stuff. And it just kind of like removes the like image of all of these things just cycling like normality, like the assumption of that just being there. And it pulls it back to like, oh yeah, like I'm here and these things are there, and that's like a really fucked up relationship that is here between me and between these forces, and between like my relationship to nature in terms of how like this is facilitating that. And then yeah, climate change is symptomatic. So yeah.
Sorry, was that an interruption?
A little bit, but it was fine. I'm still in the flow. So yeah, I think what you're talking about with the contraction, to me, that feels like the deeper side of the deeper aspect of that is this like you know, like the UN and the World Economic Forum, a bunch of like disembodied people in suits giving like PowerPoint presentations to each other with a bunch of statistics and like, you know, like this high level managerial viewpoint that I think they all have, that even though there's this, in some sense, like there's a crisis mindset, there's not a true crisis mindset. Like, holy shit, our entire way of being is fucked. It's like, it's this, maybe like one way of putting it is like, here's our whole system. And then what it feels like the managerial crisis mindset that it feels like our current governance systems are in relation to it is like, damn, there's this like piece of the system that's really messed up. It's a fairly large piece. And so we got to like use the system to address that piece. Whereas what it feels like to me is like the foundations of the very system are like rotten and are causing, we're seeing one of the symptoms, and we're seeing a lot of other symptoms too. This is kind of the meta crisis frame, which is like, we have all these individual crises, and instead of like, okay, climate change is the crisis, let's managerially solve it with tax credits for renewables and with like, you know, redoing public housing and like regulations, and, you know, like instead of that, it's like, no, this is one of multiple things that are all part of this meta crisis of like how we fundamentally relate to each other, to nature, like what are like essential energy of existence is basically. And then coming back to the stuff we've talked about with progressivism, is that is like a citizen thing in a sense at its root, like what I was just talking about with the citizen, and seeing that here like in response to this crisis is like just so beautiful, and like creates a lot of hope for me and for many other people here. Like this has been a big thing I've seen a lot of people post about and talk about, is like, yeah, the feeling of like hope and beauty of all the moments of people just really helping and doing it like well. Like it's kind of, you know, it's shocking to see like totally. Without centralized governance, it's working pretty. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's a lot of it is like
rebuilding
impressive.
Fucking roads by themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And then at the same time, what you said, like I do think it is important to have a government that's doing a lot of centralized functions and has regulation. So it's not like a black and white that's irrelevant, and and what you mentioned also about Tesla, like that's another side of this like citizen-driven, like this passion for our collective community, driving someone to devote their life to something, and then you could say, oh, he's a billionaire, blah blah blah. But he's like, his orientation was not like, what can I do to make the most money? His orientation was like, damn it, we got to get to Mars because like our planet might be messed up, and we need like renewables, we need free speech.
I mean, he
I'm just gonna do it.
invested all of his like whatever $200 million he had gotten from the PayPal sale into his next venture. You know, like if he was of that mindset of like, oh, how do I make the most money possible? You could just stick that into, you know, whatever, an index fund or something, and just chill, you know, like you don't need anything more than that. But he just like put all of that into the SpaceX risks that he's taken. It's like pretty ridiculous, like to just put all of your wealth into something as wild of an idea as SpaceX is, which is turning out to be so helpful right now with Starlink, like Starlink has really been super helpful, given that, all of the lines are down, like internet lines are down.
Yeah, and then I don't
continue.
want to turn it into like a defending
Yeah, yeah.
Musk kind of thing. Also
I
issues
am
with
absolutely
him.
defending Musk,
Cool.
but
Yeah,
go for it,
But just to not shift the focus too much towards that.
Yeah.
But yeah, as an example of this like kind of grassroots energy, and with climate change, it feels the same. And it's interesting if you look at like emissions reduction and renewables and stuff, like they didn't shift that much during the Trump administration. It's not like it was like this and then it went like this or something, which is what I think a lot of the narrative is. It like kept going like this, and like emissions like reduced during Trump's time, not because Trump wasn't reducing them, like quite the opposite, but just because there's a lot of other forces tapping into that transition besides governmental policies, at least in the current frame. Like historically they've played a role. And at the same time, I don't want to like, relating to what I was saying earlier, I don't want to like sit here and try to like defend Trump's climate change record, because from what I, in my opinion, it is bad. Like, and I really,
can you say more? Why is it bad?
Yeah, I mean, he's just very heavily promoting fossil fuels. And it's one thing to be like to be like okay with fossil fuels. It's another thing to be like pro fossil fuels. Like that energy feels really shit to me.
Yeah, I got that with Vivek Ramaswamy too. And there are moments in Vivek Ramaswamy's speech where the radar inside me goes like, like he's appeasing right now. And there are other moments where I'm like, oh no, he's like speaking his truth. And every time he like talks about like, let's get America back on like oil, let's like drill oil. Like I can really feel like an Indian boy like wanting to be accepted by country Americans, because in some ways that's my lived experience here in a way, and I have that energy in me, and I see that reflected when he's like going gung ho on like fossil fuels, or even when he like speaks about God. I'm like, bro, like you're just and it's a part. I imagine it's a part of the political game, but it's not as authentic as other things.
Well, and that's the thing. I feel like Trump is authentic in it because he's this like fire creature. He like worships fire. So I think he genuinely is like almost like erotically into oil.
Trump, the fire creature. I want to hear this.
I mean, just when you hear him talk, he's like a fucking fire. He's like, so it makes sense that he like worships fire and like oil. And I mean, it's unfortunate. But like there is like, I don't know if you've ever...
He's a very fiery character, like he's orange. Like, I wonder what his like
he builds skyscrapers and I don't know if you've ever seen like an oil power, like where there's like literal fire coming out of the pole.
I remember.
It's like, it is really like, it's a pretty primal like fire thing. And then I can see how he would be like into that.
It's kind of like fire emerging from earth, perhaps, because now oil itself is maybe earth, water mixture.
Yeah, and the abundance of like energy as well. Like there's something about like energy that is very like fire, and Trump's like obsession with like cheap energy, and like it makes sense from that. And also it sucks. But there's two kind of interesting things around that. First is nuclear, because for me like this was the big moment for me when I was like kind of started doubting like conventional climate policies. Was when I was reading they were like phasing out nuclear, and I was like, really? What are you guys doing? Like especially Germany, and also in the U.S. like the Democrat Party is not like pro-nuclear.
Why is it like, why are they not pro-nuclear?
Well, that's the thing, is like it feels like a politicized thing because there's been a few disasters, like Chernobyl and then 3 Mile and Fukushima.
Where was 3 Mile?
In the U.S., somewhere in the East Coast. It was like 40-50 years ago now. But they're all like, I mean, except Chernobyl, but that was a unique one because it was such a shit plant. They're all like fairly, like on scale, they feel contained, like the safety risks, to me at least, especially now that they've happened and there's like massive increase in like need to be prepared. But because like it just scares people, like the nature of the threat, it's kind of like a natural disaster, like a nuclear meltdown is like so scary. So I think that's where it comes from, but it's actually fairly safe, like overall, especially now that we know the disasters that have happened and like there can be more stuff. And it's cheap, it's clean, it's like the perfect renewable. It's reliable, which is essential. Like 100% renewables with wind and solar is like impossible because they're not reliable. Like you need like stable plants that can adjust surge rates, or you need huge batteries. neither of which, like the batteries is not yet feasible, hopefully in a few decades, and Musk is actually doing a lot of work on that. But otherwise, yeah, you do need like some significant capacity of stable plants that can like stabilize the flow. But anyways, that's a kind of a specific point. The core thing is nuclear, and Trump is like pro-nuclear and would like expand nuclear power. So that's the one thing where I'm like, okay, that's not too bad.
Yeah, what I've picked up from him, from the little that I've read about his like orientation towards wind, and I think also solar, is that we are not getting the right bang for the buck for how much we are investing into wind and solar. Like that's what I picked up on why he's opposed to wind. It's not because he wants to fuck up the planet, which I think is the narrative. It's that this is not working, like we're not, like that is what I picked up on. And I see that orientation as healthy in a way that I think I referenced how the DEI policies are not working. Like in my mind, yes, it's a good goal to, have a diverse country, have equity, have inclusion, but you're not going to get there at your first, like any such big goal, you're not going to get there with your first try. And we need to accept when things fail, and where we are at with DEI right now, like that acronym just like makes me want to puke. It's just like, it's just not working, like it's actually creating more divisions. I think in a similar way, that is how I see him oriented. It's like, if someone comes up with a technique, a technology, a solution where there is enough bang for the buck in using wind and solar, maybe more, I think more so he's critical of wind more so than solar, then great, bring that in. And the only way that could come forth is if the market was free and there weren't, the state wasn't interfering as much in the energy market. If the capitalist market allowed for more innovative wind solutions to come through, then perhaps at some point it makes sense to then switch. But that's my sense of what I feel like. He's like against the interference, because then you don't get good solutions.
Yeah, totally. And I was reading an article about this, which was saying like the main policy is like tax credits for renewable companies, which is interesting for two reasons. First of all, it's corporate welfare. Like you're allowing companies not to pay taxes, and there is a large green lobby of renewable energy companies. So it's like greenwashing in a sense, like, oh, it's renewables, so it's fine, but if you just remove the renewables label, it's like, oh, an industry is being allowed to not pay any taxes. And again, for a good cause, but it, you could say, but it is an interesting, like, for me, it was kind of a like, oh, like that's interesting when I removed the fact that it was for the sake of climate change, and to be like, this is literally corporate welfare. And then two is oil companies are also doing renewables. So they would also benefit from those tax credits for their renewable operations. And by having it be tax credits for renewables instead of removal of fossil fuel subsidies or like a carbon tax, it's a way for oil companies, they're only benefiting from that policy.
From the Green New Deal?
Well, specifically from the tax credit policy. Because they get tax credits for their renewable energy initiatives, which they all have, like fairly substantially. And they also avoid being penalized for their fossil fuel thing. So I'm pretty sure there's like...
that seems like a pretty amateur mistake though, no? Like
well, it's not a mistake. That's what I'm saying. Is like those companies have a lot of money and a lot of influence, and they have a large lobby. So I think this is a way for like green policies. Like the most cynical view you could have is like these politicians like need to do something to look like they're caring a lot about renewable energy.
Right.
And so they do something that is like ends up benefiting oil companies and not harming them.
Yeah.
In order to stay on the good side of the oil lobby and like maintain that income flow and maintain the those relational networks. And then the less cynical is like they do want to do something about climate change, but like it would be there's so much energy against kind of carbon tax or anything that would harm fossil fuel companies, both from voters and from energy companies, and so this is like a middle ground that they can pursue.
Interesting.
So yeah, that's one thing that came to me. And then the other thing is relating to what we've talked about in previous conversations about like, okay, here's the range of progressive causes, and then the Democrat Party narrowly selects a few, and then within that, here's the causes, and then they narrowly select certain policies. And we're not saying Trump is progressive. Like, progressives for Trump doesn't mean Trump equals progressive. Quite the opposite. It's like the Democrat Party is anti-progressive by like forcing an absolute adherence to what we consider to be some of the causes, not the right causes, and some of them the right causes. And within that, a lot of the solutions, not the right solutions, or at least like prematurely selected solutions at the federal scale. And so we're saying Trump is not progressive, but is in kind of this weird paradoxical opposite way, is fighting the anti-progressive system that inhibits like long-term true progressivism.
Right.
And to me, that feels similar with climate change and with DEI that you mentioned, and a lot of other issues, like kind of across the board. Like if you would distill our argument for Trump, at least on my end, to like one phrase, it would be like that thing, like absolute selection of causes, absolute selection of solutions in the progressive umbrella that I deeply disagree with, and that close the space for what I think are the right causes.
Right.
And again, I agree with some of the causes and some others not. And with solutions, mostly I don't agree.
Yeah.
So kind of fight it, like kind of pushing that down so that there's spaciousness again for long-term, what I would consider to be true and kind of more deeply attuned to reality progressivism to emerge.
Right.
Yeah,
that's so beautiful. And I think that paradox trips up most people, and most of the responses I've gotten around Trump's content is like, what are you talking about? Why would you vote for him if you are blank? He is not that same blank adjective, you know?
Yeah.
And really that framing of Trump is like fighting the anti-progressive system in place that is trying to stem progressivism, because like inherently capitalism is progressive. Everything good that, I mean, this is a hyperbolic statement, so don't come at me with like corner cases, but like everything great that has happened in humanity has emerged through like capitalist endeavors. Like, and
I would disagree with that, but
it's a hyperbolic statement. And and when I make that statement, I also have a very different definition of capitalism than how people usually receive it.
Right.
It's like it's come from self-interest. Like people, all of the trauma healing modalities have come from like someone like really dropping into their own self-interest, like healing their self. Like it's come from a creative interest place. Most like radical feminism was born in the US. Like that also is something I see as an entrepreneurial venture. Someone cared deeply about it to become an activist, to drive its birth, and that came from their self-interest. And that could not have happened in a society where everyone's self-interest is quelled and everyone lives this existence where like, I voted, I elected them, now it's their job, I'm gonna just go back and fucking stream Netflix and eat it's not gonna happen in that society where literally everyone is like that. There are people like that in the US, but US has like such a broad space for all sorts of different kinds of living that there are enough number of people who are like, oh, what is it that I want to do? How do I go about doing it? And the system is mostly supportive of bringing that forth. And that leads to, and like someone on my Facebook friends list got triggered because I use the word like, Trump is necessary because he'll ensure that the entrepreneurial spirit remains alive, because she, I imagine, associates entrepreneurialism with profit-oriented greediness. But it is not. Like entrepreneurial, like, your lover going and like picking up the broom on day 3 and cleaning sweeping the streets of fucking Marshall by herself is entrepreneurialism. Like that is the entrepreneurial spirit, that I'm going to do something about it. I'm not gonna like sit around. I'm gonna participate. Like that is the entrepreneurial spirit. And people who navigate that entrepreneurial spirit and get into the top echelons of wealth then actually are become incentivized in capitalist societies to stem that spirit in others. Like that's just the nature of it, unfortunately, because we aren't sufficiently heart open. Like unfortunately, the rich people in the US who have gotten rich through capitalism, many of them are not heart opened enough that they want to share their freedom, and that's because we are in a particular stage of capitalism right now.
Right.
But so then they get together and create, that is the elites, it's the elites who are ones who have like gotten into wealth, and the freedom that has brought them, they are not heart open enough to want to share it with others, because they haven't actually because the wealth that they've gotten to has not, like they're still depressed, like they're still not fully actualized. And that system then tends to like clamp down on the progressive spirit, which is how I see the Democrat system right now, which is the analogy we have been using, which is that broad set of causes, pick a certain number of causes, for those causes, pick a small sliver of policies, and then promote those and clamp them down through the state. Like that is the current Democrat machinery.
I like that, making it a cycle. Yeah. Yeah.
And Trump is coming in to break that down so that something else could emerge.
Right.
And he is just hell bent on breaking that down. He the something else that could emerge, a better solution for one of the causes. Like I'll use the question of like transitioning surgeries as an example. Like that is one cause right now, like trans identity is one cause, and there are a few solutions that have emerged, like I'll just pick hormone injections and transitioning surgeries have emerged, and now they are being like presented as the solutions, and there is disagreement even within the trans community as to how much they should be promoted, to whom should they be promoted. There could be other solutions that could open up if there is space for that creativity to come through. But if these solutions get like pushed down by the state and anything else becomes a transphobic thing, then there is no space for the new solutions to emerge.
Yeah.
Because the new solutions will go against the existing solutions in a way.
Right. Yeah. Damn. Something just clicked for me in the last few sentences of that, where it's like, the government should not be entrepreneurial. And what I mean by that is like, for example, with pharmaceuticals, like we're stuck in a system where you have like way too fast, not just pharmaceuticals, also just all kinds of chemicals and stuff. They just like get approved way too fast, and then they get thrown out into society, and they end up being bad for people, sometimes really bad for people like a few years down the line. And it feels like that same cycle of like, okay, here's a cause, right? Like let's just say trans rights, and then boom, here's like transition surgery, boom, 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 too fast. And then that works from the citizen entrepreneurial coming up, because then there's like the market to like, whoever wants to take that risk can freely take that risk. And and then the government is hopefully providing some regulatory role to ensure that there's not like crazy illegal, like, then the question is what is illegal, but like crazy things happening that are like significantly harming people.
Redressal, perhaps.
Yeah, and like this is an interesting Trump policy in relation to this, is like right to try, I think it's called, which is giving terminally ill patients the right to try untested medications or untested things.
That's a Trump policy.
Yeah, and the important part of it is they need to know that it's untested, and that they need to know the risks. Yeah. So the disclosure is like fairly rigorous. But it's like they're terminally ill. They want to, like, if they want to, right? Like, you can't, not forcing it on them. Like, they're terminally ill. Nothing has worked. They've tried, let's say they have cancer. They've tried chemotherapy. They're still terminally ill. And then there's this untested thing that comes up that they could try, but they're currently they legally cannot use that because it's not tested. And so then there's the right to try, and they get to try it. And, so the risk, you want the risk to be in the emergent bottom up, like the solution emerges, and then the early adopters have the freedom to try it, within constraints, and importantly, they get disclosure about what they're trying, which is a big issue right now, actually. And actually, with RFK, I feel like pretty excited actually about how the Trump administration is going to go about improving that.
Interesting. Why so? Like, what about
Well, because RFK is so focused on like the lack of disclosure
Right.
of what chemicals are in things,
Right.
and also like the regulatory landscape of like how those things are approved. Like, because when something is approved by the FDA, it's like, oh, it's good, but a lot of those things are freaking terrible. So just readjusting that. So yeah, from the bottom up, then there's the freedom to choose, and then you kind of, the information comes back over time. You get to see like what's happening, and the federal level should almost be like the last, or not almost, it kind of feels like it should be the last level. Like once the thing is tested, it goes there. So to me, like a progressive, I mean, this is just coming to me now, so you know, I'm saying this lightly, but like a progressive society has a conservative government, in the sense that the government creates the spaciousness for progressivism and adopts those things like once they're solid. But for them to become solid, it's like, and I feel like that's something with like what's coming to me now is like the famine in communist China, where like 40 million people died, like crazy number.
When was that?
That was during Mao. It was like mid 20th century.
Or?
Well, that was super fucked up too.
Yeah, I see.
This was another fucked up thing. Like Mao was one of the biggest mass murderers of history, like more than World War II, by a lot, because the federal government, you know, and the communist Chinese government imposed a policy that they thought was going to be great. Like, you know, he didn't want to kill people. It was this amazing, like, it was going to be communes, and you know, I remember learning about it in detail like many years ago.
Utopian beauty.
Yeah, and it was beautiful. I mean,
singing and dancing in the fields, all of us together. Like,
the vision was great, and also people working, and like it makes sense on paper. Like even reading it, I was like, this is cool. Like this makes sense. Communes, and like they were well structured and stuff, but they didn't work. And then like 40 million people died. And so, I mean, that's a very extreme example, but it's this thing where like the federal government, that's like the largest scale of implementation, and there's no experimentation space there anymore because it's a single national solution that everyone is affected by.
The cost of failure is huge.
It's massive, exactly. And the cost of the benefits of success are also massive.
Right.
But like
but it belies the typical path to success, which is the 11th attempt is the success. You know? Like you need to go through 10 failures. It's just like a known thing in the tech world. You know, it's like you need to go through a string of failures, pivot a few times, and then be successful. But it's like, if your first failure costs 40 million people, you know,
exactly. And that's what federalism is, like essentially. It's like an entrepreneurial society where the states are testing things. And this was the vision of the US initially. And what I'm excited is we're kind of returning to now, and that I feel Trump very much like moving us towards, where the states are experimenting with different things. And this is a big thing with Trump wanting to abolish the Department of Education, feels like part of this too. He wants to keep a skeleton of it, but most of it he wants to give back to the states. Not because he doesn't care about education, the opposite, because he recognizes like the US sucks at education, spends so much money, has shit outcomes. So if you push it back to the states, now the states have more freedom to try different things. And then below that, school choice. Like,
I mean, I'll make a provocative statement here, which is, you know, I'm kind of hesitant to make it, but it really lives in me as like, why the fuck are there so many kids depressed enough in US high schools that they feel drawn to picking up a gun and killing their schoolmates? You know, it's like, why? What are the schools fucking doing to bring students to that? You know, it's like that angle is never looked at with regards to high school shooting. Like, and the design of schools is so terrible. Like every time I look at a school, I can't tell from the outside if it is empty, if it is a prison or a school. Like other than the like, it has this like trapped energy, like energetically. So it's like I'm actually quite excited, and it's a tragedy that American education is so bad. Like just compared, if you look at, there's so many statistics on this about immigrants coming from other countries like India and China and like really flourishing in, you know, the opportunities that America provides. And it's quite tragic to me that American middle school, high school, even university education is horrible. And this would be fun to unpack what that means at some point. But I wanted to respond to that thing you said about, for a progressive society, you need a conservative government.
Wait, can I just finish the education thread first? And then I want to hear that. Just so it's not hanging.
Sure.
Yeah, because the school choice thing feels important because I don't think anyone knows about that policy really.
No, okay.
Where he basically gave parents like tuition credits for them to choose which school to send their child to instead of them being forced to send their child to like the one school.
Public school, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's still public. I think, I don't know the details if it's just, I think it is beyond, it's also charter schools, maybe private schools, I'm not sure.
Montessori,
but it's like 10K tuition that they can either put towards the public school or, and if, as I understand it, if the tuition is higher, then that 10K is paid by the government and the rest is paid, they have to pay privately. But what that does is like, it's this entrepreneurial society thing where you have the individual citizen suddenly now has agency to drive good schools basically. And parents like care for their children for the most part. So if their child's coming back like depressed and not learning anything, they're like, oh my God.
Or if they're really afraid of high school shootings, they can make the choice to like send their kids to a different school structure where it is not so crowded, it just has different energy. And
yeah, exactly. And then you have the state level where each state is experimenting. And then the states copy each other, like based on what's working and what's not working.
Right.
And I feel like he's done that with a lot of things. Like to me, like climate change is a bit different because it's like the federal level, like the tragedy of the commons thing. Like you do kind of need the federal level for that. So it doesn't operate in the same way as with education. But the core thing is that it's breaking the stranglehold of like one cause, one solution. You're in or you're out.
Right.
And if you're out, you're like you're a racist, you're a climate denier, you're where to like no, like this is a more nuanced, open conversation, and now there's space for us to like consider the causes, consider all the solutions, and have that conversation reopened because the current solutions like are failing. Like I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say on education and climate change, like the example of China, like it does feel like what the US is doing is like a milder but analogous version of that, where there's like a federal policy, which sounds amazing, sounds great, and if it worked, it would be great, but it's failing miserably. Both of those are failing miserably, and the practical reality is so different from like the intention, not because of anyone's bad will, but just that's reality, and it hasn't been tested because there's this federal structure. And given the failure, that's the key thing, is like given the failure of these policies, it's important to reopen the space. Not just if they were working, cool, we should keep going. Okay, I'll finish there. I could keep rambling about that forever, but I want to hear what you were saying about the
I have that,
point,
but I also want to add that there were two things I want to respond to. One is this, I think you referenced it at one point in one of your earlier shares here in this particular dialogue about, I'm going to paraphrase it, is there's this energy in climate change work of one of like, somebody do something. It's like that energy is like, oh my God, the world is burning, please, somebody do something. And like, what fucking solution has emerged from that state of being? And I again often use trauma healing metaphors. Like, if I go to a therapist and I tell him like, hey, like, I'm dealing with these panic attacks I have every day because I've just recovered memories of being raped as a child, and the therapist goes, oh my God, somebody needs to do something. It's like, it's not going to help me heal in any way. No creative solutions can come from that state of like, oh my God, someone needs to do, it's like, it's not going to come from that. So there has to be space for grounded creativity to solve problems. That's just the reality of problem solving. And there can be, and there's place for activism in there too, but it's a idiotic notion that activism and regulations by themselves, doesn't matter what the state of the economy is, are gonna solve climate change. Like, no, you need the economy to be thriving. You need inflation to be like maintained at a low rate so that people are not worried on a daily basis for food, groceries, gas, so that they feel safe, so that they can be creative. You need safety for creativity.
Why is that important for climate change? I mean, I agree those are important generally.
So that they can come up. It's important to maintain the economy at well-functioning economy to incentivize creative solutions for climate change.
Yeah,
because
I like that.
Activists and like regulators are not the ones who are going to solve climate change. Like climate change is going to be solved by individual entrepreneurs, and I gave the example of regenerative farming, like someone came up with this, the safe soil movement. It's like individual ideas that have the possibility of 10x impact on shifting how we live life, like composting toilets, like someone like promoting composting toilets. They won't be able to do that if they're worried about meeting rent every month, or just not being able to eat food. So it is essential for the economy to be functioning in order to actually solve climate change, and that seems to be missing from the like climate change side of things, like the Democrat like debate side of things.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. Are you done, or you look like you're having a thought?
No, I was just wondering if, I want to just pause here. I'll leave the conservative progressive thing for another alive moment.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I love all that.
Yeah.
I think what you brought up about like the trauma healing modalities is really interesting, because that's also a thing I'm like very centrally devoting my life to, is creating infrastructure for more entrepreneurialism in that domain.
If you had marketing budget, you could have inserted an ad for Flourish, right?
Yeah. We paused this transmission. But yeah, it's like, it feels weird to link that with capitalism, but it's true.
Link what with capitalism?
Like the emergence of trauma healing modalities.
Right.
It's true, not in the narrow definition of capitalism. Like capitalism equals like big oil companies and McDonald's
greed and money,
and like Facebook.
Yeah.
That's like, there's a lot of, it's a landscape. To me, capitalism is like a landscape. Oh, I just remembered a great point from earlier that feels really relevant to this, which is like, because you're talking about like the phase of capitalism we're in. And there's this, I think it's clear that this phase of capitalism has lots of major issues, like almost everybody would agree with that. But then there's kind of a lot of responses, but two kind of contrasting responses one can have to that. One is like, capitalism sucks, we need a different system.
The other, maybe out with the bathwater.
Yeah, exactly. The other response is, this is part of this phase of capitalism, and we're evolving towards a much more beautiful, heart-centered, collaborative phase of capitalism that still has the foundational tenets of capitalism, but is like works through a lot of the challenges that are, which you brought up very, I think, precisely, which is the heart closedness. And that's the thing I'm really excited about doing, and I'm very much doing it within the frame of capitalism, like the startup I'm doing to enable more entrepreneurialism in like trauma healing, and the core of it is like enabling, making it an easier path for people to develop new modalities, or to like combine modalities, or to become really good in a modality in a new way, and then have like a clear like marketplace where people can like choose who is like working the best for them.
Interesting.
And then also creating like, bringing also in like the insurance side of things, where you get like collective care systems where you have a bunch of different providers. I mean, this is like decades long kind of trajectory. But like the foundation of capitalism, which you're talking about, which I think people like take for granted, but is so amazing, is like, I, as a citizen, can care about something and do something.
Yes.
And I'm allowed to do it, which is like very non-trivial. Like historically, like feudalism, not the case. Even for the aristocracy, they're trapped in the system. They can't really do that much. And then, of course, like, centralized dictatorships, or like most systems throughout time, at least like of large civilizations, like nation states, which is what we're in, like that's not going to change, that we're in a nation state. So in the context of like large aggregated civilizations, the vast majority, like individual citizens, do not have the freedom to care about something and then act on it. And it's not perfect in our society, but it's quite great, like relatively speaking to other systems.
I mean, we had serfdoms and widespread slavery before that. So the idea that a human could act in their self-interest was massively revolutionary. And that is classical liberalism. Like classical liberalism is the birth of capitalism.
Exactly. Which is, I think, what comes back to this anti-progressive thing, is that like that's why the Democrat Party feels to me like anti-progressive, is because it's closing that space of like this like liberalism out of which like creative energy gets to like contribute to society. So anyways, there's so much more to say on that, but that was the thing.
Actually,
maybe just the last sentence I'll say to close that is I guess an invitation to think of like or allow the possibility that like the way to relate to the issues of capitalism right now is not the whole system of capitalism is horrible, but this current phase of capitalism has a lot of really gnarly challenges, and the best solution, in my opinion, and it sounds like in your opinion, and I would invite like people to at least like sit with that possibility, is to evolve capitalism to like a more heart-centered, heart-open space. And what that looks like is not anything that we are presented as options. Like there's a level of independence required in thinking in that way and coming to those conclusions, because a lot of it is like, you know, in my case, like creating this marketplace startup that's going to enable more entrepreneurialism and helping people connect to their hearts in effective ways. And there's a billion other ways that can look in how you like live that in your life to contribute to the evolution of capitalism, the foundation of capitalism. But it's different from any solutions like on either side or anything you're presented with. So all right, I'll leave it at that. That was a whole rant.
No, that was beautiful. And I think we are closing in an hour, and I just want to kind of bring this to a close with the statement I had bookmarked, which is progressivism. In order for progressivism to survive in society, it needs a conservative government. And here I want to point out that conservative in the US or say in the Netherlands is different from conservative in Saudi Arabia. It's almost like there are a few countries where the conservative movements have liberty as one of their values. You know, France comes to mind, the US comes to mind, the Netherlands, I'm not sure, but you know, it's like, and sometimes there's almost a paradox in American liberalism where if you are an American liberal who is liberal because you are against the conservative movement and that's it, you know, that's kind of the source of your liberalism, then it inherently puts you into a paradoxical state. And this is a heady argument, but it is true, because aspects of the conservative movement in the US are attempting to conserve the notion of liberty. Yes, there are flaws there, you know, like just historically they have been blinded by their orientation towards being white and Christian, and there have been shadows, you know, like, yeah, liberty for all men, oh, not black people though, you know, it's like there are shadows there, but those shadows can be walked through without getting rid of the values, you know, in fact, the values help people walk through the shadows, you know, like Abraham Lincoln was like, liberty for all, that should also mean black people, and he like, you know, made that happen. Essentially just kind of closing out that point through the technical difficulties we had is that the American Republic has solid values upon which it is founded. There are problems with it, and the solution is not to throw away all of the values, but actually to like further promote those. And there is a paradox in the like liberal movement here, especially aspects of it that are just plainly against conservatives, and that is, you know, not all conservative movements are the same. The conservative movement in Saudi Arabia is different from the conservative movement in the US, and if the conservative movement itself adopts liberty as a value, then one needs to be careful in how one, and that's why, you know, like that's the context under which your statement makes sense to me. Right.
Yeah, it's like if the society is intrinsically progressive, then the conservative movement is preserving progressivism.
The progressivism, right?
Exactly. Another thing that I think of is like Kamala Harris is like famous, where she always says like, look to what can be, unburdened by what has been. And the core energy in that, I think, is of the 2 points we said, of like either get rid of the system as it is, like capitalism, and replace it with a different system, versus like evolving capitalism. That's the get rid of capitalism view. And that to me feels like the same energy as the Chinese Communist Revolution, which is I think why, like, even though they're not communists like policy wise, they get labeled as communists, because it's not because of their policies, it's because of the energy of their vision of implementing progressive solutions to progressive causes that are not tested through like grassroots, like kind of built up, and that are just projected in this kind of like utopian energy into society, top down, and all dissent is crushed, and then have these like horrible downstream consequences. So I think that's where that comes from. Yeah, damn, I wish we didn't have that technical difficulty.
Yeah,
like
no worries.
we
I think
kind of
it
like
also
interrupted.
felt like
We had such a good flow. And
it came at a point where I was also feeling like, okay, it is time.
Okay, cool,
It
yeah.
already become an arc. So let's just do like a closing statement or so. And
Yeah, I mean, I guess coming back to climate change and Trump, I think it's super important to say that I disagree with Trump on climate change, and you can disagree with Trump on climate change and still vote for him, which is like a point that connects to a lot of other things, if that makes sense. Like, it relates to also what we're talking about, the opportunistic case, which is like, I'm trying to find the right words to like really nail it.
Take your time.
I guess what's coming to me is like the time we're in right now in American society is like there's a really deep reorientation in progress that doesn't have like the directionality of it hasn't like clearly formed yet, and that's why everyone keeps saying like this is the most important election of our lifetimes. But it's not just about the election; it's about so many other things that are also happening. There's this deep reorientation going on, which has, as I see it, there's like two kind of contrasting visions. One is, and very like high level contrasting visions, lots of subtleties and like fractalization within that. One is the evolution of capitalism, and the like core like democratic liberal values of America. And as you were saying, like realizing that holding those values enables us to work through the shadows and acknowledging there have been and still are a lot of shadows to that, and things are not perfect. But that the core of that system has the energy to bring us into a way more like evolved, conscious, loving, connected state as a society. And focusing on that, and that's where I'm coming from. As far as I understand, that's where you're coming from, and that's what's causing us to want to vote for Trump, because he's the current best candidate for that direction. And then the other vision is like the problems that this reorientation, like the other vision for that reorientation, is this like what to me feels like a destructive energy that it has good intentions. Like I feel the good intentions behind it, and this like desire to connect to love, and just seeing the shittiness of the current systems and just being like, this is so bad, we have to like destroy it. That energy, and we have to like, it's so bad that we can't trust it or trust the people in it to do anything right. It has to be this like forceful top down, like kind of Civil War energy, you know, like with slavery, like this forceful top down like domination of the society's current shittiness to make it good. And there's a lot there with trusting people to, if they're in their self-interest, that they can connect to love and like act from there. Enough people at least, versus like that's not the case. It has to be top down forced. And there's those two visions, and so that's like it's bigger than any specific policy. And even though like my heart really like grieves and feels sad like when I think about climate change and then think about voting for Trump, you know, like it's going to cause some destruction, I think, also in terms of like less regulations on environmental protection. So that's like there as well, but it's the thing that is happening here is like so much bigger than any specific policy. And the policies do contribute to it, but the core of the issue at stake is the deep directionality of American society and these two contrasting visions. Which I just keep repeating it because it feels like it's, even for me, there's still dissonance in like deeply disagreeing with Trump on a specific policy area that's really important to me, and then still voting for him because of this like the way I relate to this election has like been so different from previous elections because of this like meta sense of like we're in this deep meta crisis and there's radically different visions that are going to have huge impacts for my entire life and the life of my children and grandchildren. Like it is an important moment, and that's what I'm really attuning to. And then the policy things, the specific policy things where the disagreement is like here instead of here. Like here is this meta that I'm talking about, the directionality, and then here is the specific policy, like specific issue, specific policy, don't agree, is secondary to this level. So yeah, that was, I repeat myself a lot because it's, and I almost want to do it again, but I'm not going to, because it just feels like such a like mind fuck in a way to relate to this in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add on this. I feel like we had a whole journey starting with climate change, but we like went in many different directions, and I would love to be educated more on this, like specifically climate change. Like I still acknowledge like my knowledge on the policies themselves is not solid. So if there is like constructive comments, like I welcome that in the comment section. Things that I can go read up myself, pointers, like I really welcome all of that. And the metaphor I have aligned in me is like, climate change needs creative solutions. I cannot be creative if my house is in disarray. Like I need to clean up my house first in order to be creative. And the state of society right now under, like the state of progressivism under the Democrats is in complete disarray, and we need to like clean that first so that we can have creative solutions come through. So I'll just close with that.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.